Have you ever heard your DNA was found at a crime scene, so you probably did it? Sounds logical until you actually look at how DNA behaves in the real world. Tonight, I want to walk you through something that completely changes that story. Trace DNA has no clock. It doesn't know when it was deposited. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Quick disclaimer. This is not legal advice. It's a case agnostic framework built from publicly available science and standards. I don't work in a crime lab. I audit documents and literature, lab worksheets, policies, validation studies, and I focus on how trace, quote unquote, touch, low template DNA is used in real cases. We'll use the Idaho case as an example at the end, but the logic applies far beyond any single case. In DNA, there are two different questions that everyone, from TV shows to courtrooms, keeps mashing together. Number one, source level. Who could this DNA come from? Could this profile be consistent with person X? Number two, activity level. How and when did this DNA get there? Was it deposited during the crime or at some other time? What usually happens is this. The DNA could be his. Quietly turns into he was there at the crime doing the crime. That jump from could be his to he did it, that's an activity level error. Modern guidance from NIST, the European Network of Forensic Science Institutes, the International Society for Forensic Genetics, and ISO, and a few other standard organizations all roughly say the same thing. Source level statistics do not automatically answer activity level questions. Activity level conclusions must be built on context. Who was there? When? How many people move? How objects move? And trace, quote unquote, touch, low template DNA is the worst offender because it's tiny in amount, easy to transfer, easy to persist, and it almost never comes with its own timestamp. So then we get to the activity level hypotheses. And there's two main ones, H1 and H2. What the sheath DNA is really being asked to do. So for H1, it's usually the state story, and that is crime time deposition. The defendant was inside 1122 King during the murders. The sheath was in the room with him while the attacks took place. His DNA was deposited on the sheath during the killings. Direct crime time contact. So H1, he engaged in the criminal activity. The DNA is treated like a fingerprint of him being there while the murders were happening. And then you have H2, which is usually the defense or the system story, and that is non-crime time deposition. The defendant was not at 1122 King during the murders. The sheath is a movable object. It can be handled, moved, or stored elsewhere. Any DNA from him, if it's truly his at all, was not deposited at crime time. It arrived before the crime, after the crime, or via indirect or secondary transfer, contamination, or lab dynamics. H2, he engaged in an alternate, legitimate, or innocent activity. The DNA reflects some other contact with the sheath, not participation in the murders. DNA by itself does not tell you whether H1 or H2 is true. Here's the non-negotiable fact. Trace low template DNA has no clock. It doesn't know when it was deposited. So for the purposes of this brain exercise, I am going to illustrate a picture. You saw Miss Potts's live today. She beautifully went over the fact that as of the date of this video, DNA experts are not trained to be able to determine the how and the when of the DNA. I have a 4-part live series. Each live is about 5 hours long on the how and the when of the DNA. It's on my playlist tab on my channel. And shout out to Miss Potts. Thank you. I absolutely loved your last live. This next illustration is just to show you how we should be cautious about thinking about trace DNA. So hypothetically, before touching DNA, you ask, what do the phones CSLI, TA say about where everyone was. What do vehicles, CCTV, traffic cams show? What car went where when? What do neighborhood and doorbell cameras show about arrival and departure times? What do receipts, digital logs, and work records say about movements? How does the scene layout fit into that? Stairs, blind spots, terrain, entry and exit routes. You stitch that into a case timeline. 4 a.m., phone X is here. Car Y is here. At 4:10 a.m., the camera shows no movement. At 4:20 a.m., the device pings from location X. That's time and space reconstruction. That's Cy Ray's lane. Cy Ray was the defense expert that was going to testify in the Brian Koberger case. Not only is he a veteran expert, he is the pioneer of the cell phone data CSLI field who trains Homeland Security and law enforcement for this very technique. And that would have been the first time ever in his 35 plus year career that he would testify for the defense. Once you have a timeline, then you ask, is it even plausible he was in the room at that time? Do the phone, car, and video allow that, or do they rule it out? Could this object have moved in or out at those times? Is it reasonable that this sheath traveled with him, or could it have moved separately? Are there innocent ways his DNA could have ended up there outside that window? Shared spaces, prior handling, secondary transfer, lab storage, packaging, etc. Those answers tell you whether H1, crime time deposition, or H2, non-crime time deposition, is even compatible with the global timeline. After all of that, then you ask what the DNA means. If the timeline supports H1, he was there at crime time, the sheath DNA might be consistent with that story. It doesn't prove it, but it doesn't clash with it either. If the timeline supports H2, he wasn't there during crime time, then any DNA has to be read as non-crime time deposition. By definition, if he wasn't there then, his DNA, if present, arrived before, after, or via some other route. That's the crucial point. Trace DNA cannot override the timeline. It has to sit inside the timeline. And it gets even more important now that our technology can pick up environmental DNA, sometimes called eDNA. We're no longer just talking about a drop of blood or a clear fingerprint on a knife. We now have tools that can pull human and animal DNA out of air samples, water, dust, surfaces and places we occupy, and places we've never visited. The more sensitive our methods become, the more we see. DNA is an ecosystem signal, not just a you touch this once signal. It's naturally occurring in buses, trains, stairwells, elevators, shared housing, sidewalks, and yes, even in places where you've never personally set foot, because people and objects are constantly moving around it. So old 1990s logic, your DNA was found at a crime scene, so you probably did it, was shaky even back then. With modern sensitivity and environmental DNA, it's not just shaky, it's scientifically outdated. The only way this makes sense now is to ask, how could this DNA have gotten there? How could it have moved there? Does that fit H1, crime time, criminal activity, or H2, some other innocent or indirect activity? You're not hearing this just from me. The main scientific bodies have been hitting at this for years. The European Network of Forensic Science Institutes evaluate DNA reporting, separate source level who from activity level how when, warns against carrying match statistics into activity level claims without specific reasoning. NIST, DNA mixture interpretation and human factors, emphasize the difficulty and uncertainty of low-level DNA, low-level and mixture DNA. Stress that communication of limits is crucial. Highlight the risk of overstating what such evidence can prove. And it is this NIST report, the Human Factors of Systems Approach, that I did my 4-part live series that are all about 5 hours long. If you want more information about this NIST report in particular, that is on my playlist tab on my channel. The International Society for Forensic Genetics highlight transfer, persistence, and secondary transfer, urge cautious content-aware interpretation. The ISO IE 17025 method, validation and impartiality, insist on documented validation, error rates, and traceability, require that labs communicate what a result does and does not tell you, like timing. In plain English, they're all saying don't treat could be his DNA source as if it magically answers he was here committing the crime at this time. Activity. Activity level interpretation is built from non DNA evidence first, or as I like to put it, if the evidence that actually has a timestamp says he wasn't there, then the DNA, if anything, agrees with that. It wasn't deposited at crime time either. You don't have to believe any particular outcome in this case to see the structure. If Cy Ray's reconstruction of the phone and car data is right, then the phone does not reliably appear at 1122 at crime time. The car and key traffic cam footage is not reliably his. And properly mapped timing advanced CSLI is exculpatory in effect. That pulls the activity level story toward H2. The defendant was not at 1122 during the murders. Once H2 is the better supported activity level hypothesis from time and space evidence, then trace DNA on a movable sheath cannot honestly be sold as he was there during the killings. Instead, the only scientifically coherent description becomes, if this is his DNA at all, must have been deposited at some other time in some other way. In other words, the timeline doesn't have to submit to the DNA. The DNA has to submit to the timeline. For trace DNA to mean anything, it has to sit inside the rest of the evidence that actually has timestamps. Once you do that honestly, you end up here. If the timeline says he wasn't there, then any DNA is, by definition, non-crime time DNA. It might still be his, but it's not proof he did the thing. So that's where we are. We're past 1990s DNA education. We live in a world where our tools can read environmental DNA from air and water. That means the logic has to change. Trace touch low copy DNA needs a timeline. In this case, there isn't a reliable one. If this has helped you see DNA evidence differently, let me know in the comments. Does this change how you hear DNA at a crime scene in news stories? What else do you want to learn about activity level, timelines, or environmental DNA? If you want more deep dives like this, hit subscribe. Share this with someone who still thinks DNA is a magic guilt stamp. And I'll see you in the next one.